Hey everyone, welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Durling, and I thank you so much for watching. This episode, introducing a brand new guest to the show. We've chatted plenty of times online. This is the first time we've spoken face to face. I'm talking to Wes Combs, who runs an Instagram page called Sammy Hagar Fan Page. You can see why I've got him on here to talk. And Wes, how are you doing?
Doing all right. Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. And yeah, this is like a little addition onto the Sammy Hagar deep dive series. I just can't seem to let it go. We finished the last episode with the Crazy Times album, so now I want to talk about something that I talked about a little bit in my book Red on Black, but I didn't go into as much detail as oh, thank you, man, appreciate it. But I wanted to talk about the various live albums and compilations, best ofs that have come out over the years, because I think they kind of there's a different character to each of them, and I think some of them are very important in some ways. So I want to get started with Sammy Hagar's first live album from 1978, All Night Long. Came out on Capitol Records originally, and that's what there's the cover right there, of course, lots of red. And this album here was it was one of the first of Sammy's Capitol albums that wasn't what I call a truck stop tape that I actually managed to find. And I think that I would start anybody that's curious to get into Sammy's early work, his pre-Geffen stuff, with this album right here. What are your thoughts on the All Night Long album?
I well, let's put it this way. I have a confession. There was a lot of back in the day growing up, I didn't really go to a lot of live albums. For whatever reason, I don't like, bands like Kiss, I know lived off it. They needed those live albums. But my preference was a lot of times when I put something on, I would listen to I'd listen to the studio records and stuff because so many times live albums weren't live albums anyway because they'd
Right.
constantly go back in and do stuff. I didn't normally want the crowd noise. I didn't, if depending on what the album was. Um, so I didn't really get into it. I'll tell you the album though that got me stirred up into the live again was and I'm not helping you that much on that one, but it's this one right here. Greatest Hits
Okay,
Live.
so I don't know what that is.
Well, you know what? Let's put it this way. A lot of times I have this one right here. Can you see that?
Yeah, let me see the back of that, Wes. The songs that are on it. I can't even read
I
it.
read it to you, but it is we got red. We got if you don't have this, you got to get it. We got red. We got Trans Am, Love or Money, Bad Motor Scooter, Rock and Roll Weekend, Turn Up the Music, Plain Jane, This Planet's on Fire, I've Done Everything for You, and Space Station number 5 is number 10.
Okay,
Um,
so I'll bet you anything. I'll bet you anything that any of those song titles that you just mentioned, the versions are from here. Because what you've
Probably,
got
yeah.
there is one of the many, well, I'll call it a truck stop CD. It's not a
I
legitimate.
actually love that. You're the first person that I've ever heard use that term, and I love that term because that is exactly when I was cutting my teeth on Sammy stuff back in the day.
It's all I could find was those.
I would, yeah, I would go
Yeah.
into my record store and I know for a fact I'd look at stuff and I'd be like, this isn't an official release. Or there were so many Sammy albums that the same songs were on every, and that's
Mhm.
exactly when you described it. That is, what
Yeah.
I saw in the record
and
stores.
and and those have been reissued so many times. I'll show. I'll actually. This is as good a place as any. I'll show you what got me started. It's in the book, but for those that haven't read it, I've still got this. This tape right here is called Red Hot.
I
It's
have that
Capitol, so
too.
it's a legitimate record company release. But yeah, there's just something about it. You look at it and you go, that's not. There wasn't a lot of time spent on the artwork here, and this is a mixture of songs from All Night Long and then Live 1980. And I bet all the songs that are on here are on that CD. I bet you they're the same versions because this
It
has
probably is because once
Bad Motor
again we talked to
Scooter, Turn
yeah.
Up the Music, Space Station Number Five, Rock and Roll Weekend, 20th Century Man, Plain Jane, and I've Done Everything for You.
Yours that one has Make It Last and Reckless on it though.
Okay, so Make It
I,
Last and Reckless is from this, the
yeah, I
medley.
don't see that. I don't see that on this version, but you have what? How many songs on that album? It's
Well, All Night
five,
Long
six, seven.
originally
You
had
got seven
7 on it.
songs. Yeah, this has
This
10, but uh it doesn't have Make It Last Reckless on it. And this one was released in it looks like well it says 2000. Dude, this was released like in the 2000s and
Yeah, but those
we're
recordings are not from the 2000s.
right, but it says 1978, 1983
Okay.
uh
Yeah.
but this album wasn't released until 2002.
Yeah. So like I said, though that his Capitol stuff, because he didn't have a contract that prevented it, they would constantly reissue his stuff. They'd put it out and say, here's, best of live or whatever, right? And
Yeah,
you'd
and
look
as a
at it and the
collector that
casual
as a collector that's hell because you have to go back and you're like, okay, I don't own that one. I don't own that one.
see, I came to a certain point where I just stopped with those because like I want the officially released ones. But the reason it
Yeah.
says 1978 and 1983 is because All Night Long came out in 78 and then they later they issued Live 1980 in 1983. So what you've got there is just another, and but here's and I normally I'm right with you, Wes, as far as like when I want to get into a band, I want to get the studio recordings. But anybody that's heard the early Sammy Hagar albums, those albums are very tamely recorded. These live
Keyboards.
versions just have so much more energy. They're faster, they're heavier, they're just better. I just think the definitive versions of all of his early
No, that's what I was
songs.
gonna say. It's a live album if it offers something that the studio recording doesn't, which
Yeah,
is a lot of times with Sammy in the early days, it was a lot of keyboards. I mean, you listen to a couple of those live tracks from the old stuff, it's heavy, man. It's
yeah,
all the way through
yeah.
and it's raw. And
It,
if a studio album is played live in the studio and it's a little produced or whatever, it's still to me raw, like that first Van Halen record was,
right.
live in the studio. But with Sammy, if they're doing something live that's a different, sometimes they just get, creative and they, inspiration hits and something else comes out of it. But yeah, the rawness of that CD makes me
Yeah.
listen to that over the studio recordings and that.
Oh yeah.
So
No, I totally get that. It was there's only one other example that I can think of where I would recommend somebody start with a live album as far as it being better than the studio recordings, and that's the early Whitesnake. I would say get Live in the Heart of the City from 1980. They're faster, they've got more energy, there's just a different feel to them. And in the case of the Sammy Hagar stuff, this is the first time I heard any of the Montrose songs when I heard Bad Motor Scooter and Space
mhm.
Station Number Five. I love the guitar jam between Sammy and Gary Peel. I love, Bill Church doing a little bass solo. Also, that All Night Long album, something that's a little bit more confusing. That came out in the UK, but it came out called Loud and Clear,
I
which has
know,
got a
right?
different cover on it, right? But it's the same album. Now they
Yeah.
added a version of Space Station Number Five. That's the only difference. So we might as well now, since we've talked about it, we'll skip ahead to live 1980. Now this has Trans Am, Lover Money, Plain Jane. So this has the songs like this is the other half of the songs that make up that disc you have there.
Right.
All really good stuff. Um, And I've said this many times because this album is all stuff from the Street Machine album and the Danger Zone album. It doesn't repeat anything from his first three. So there's nothing on here that was on here. And he does do Space Station Number Five is on this one too, but that's Montrose. Now
Yeah,
this
that looks a little bit closer. It's 8 tracks on that album, and that looks a little closer to mine, but it has Space Station on it. Yeah,
yeah,
instead
it's the
of
same, it's kind of the same picture, isn't it? It's the same photo shoot.
yeah, this one's yeah, more like can you see that?
Yeah, if you turn that like this, that's pretty
Yeah.
much the same picture, right?
Yeah.
Same expression on his face.
Could
He's holding
be,
the guitar
yeah.
the same way. Now,
Yeah.
this was recorded at the Hammersmith Odeon, and I've said this many times. Obviously, they didn't just record the 8 songs. I want to hear this full concert. I'd
Yeah,
like to see a
exactly.
deluxe version of that come out. Um, yeah, so those are his two. Those are either of those two, or the combination of, or that CD that Wes held up. There's also there's a CD called Red Hot that has a different cover than this. It's the same thing. It's got a few more songs on it, but
Yeah.
those are still the best versions of those Sammy Hagar songs from his Capitol years,
No,
like
I agree.
Red and Rock and Roll Weekend and Turn Up the
Hmm.
Music. Because I remember hearing, I listened to that first. That was the first thing I ever bought from Sammy. And then, like you said, it was those truck stop tapes. There's one called Cruising and Boozing. There's one called Turn Up the Music.
Yeah.
That's all I could find, so I bought
I had
those.
the cruising and boozing.
So I said, okay, I know some of these songs, but they're so tame sounding. They're so,
Hmm.
they're slowed down, and they just don't have the the heaviness, the hard rock that those live versions do. So I would definitely say start with anything that we've talked about so far, guys. If you want to dig into Sammy's Capitol catalog, dig into the live stuff first, however you can find it. Um, the next thing I want to talk about is not live. It's a best of, and record labels have done this since the dawn of time, and they keep doing it whenever an artist switches their record label, especially if they start to have more success. You'll start seeing reissues of older material. And Capitol did that a lot when Sammy switched over to Geffen Records. So the first thing that came out was this
Yep, I have that on
rematch.
vinyl.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Now, this is actually one of the rare CDs I have because this is not a reissue. I think there's only one version of it. Um, Originally, this came out in 1982. It's called Rematch. And
Love the cover.
yeah. But what's interesting about it, they don't really make it look like it's a best of. So that was kind of tricky. But this is actually this CD is called Rematch and More. And it came out in 1987, and it's an early Capitol CD, and they actually stuck 5 extra songs on here. So this has 15 songs on it. But I first found this on cassette. It was another one of the earliest things I found, and it's the first time I ever heard "This Planet's on Fire." I'd never heard that song before because I wasn't on the Red Hot, and it wasn't on all night long. So that was pretty cool. But again, it's these are studio versions. If you can find this, if you want to hear what the studio version sounds like, you can go by that, or you can go with this. If you can, I think you can still find this. This came out in
Yeah,
1990.
that one has Sitting on the Dock of the Bay on it, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Which is kind
yeah,
of a
yeah. This came out in 1992. This is a legitimate Capitol CD release, although I mentioned in my book, I think the artwork is terrible.
okay,
But
what
they
other
just
album has that been on? Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. Isn't that the only album that's been on?
Yeah, that was never on a studio album. It was put out
Right.
as a single by itself, which, so it's got that, and it's also got what's the other one? Well, I've Done Everything for You. The studio version of that
It's on there.
was never on an album.
Yeah.
Um it was on All Night
Until
Long.
that album. Well, it was on the live. It was on
Yeah,
live.
the
Yeah.
studio version though
Right.
wasn't that is the first time that you could
Yeah.
get. Well, actually, I've Done Everything for You was on this, the rematch. But this is the
Hmm.
first time that Sitting on the Dock of the Bay was readily available. And I remember thinking, that's weird. So, like
Yeah.
I said many times, Capitol did not know what to do with Sammy. They just had him doing everything, right? Um, but now sometimes they'll put out a best of, and it's worth getting because there's new songs on it. Case in point, Unboxed
Yeah.
from
High hopes and
1994. This is a Geffen best of, and this some will say this got him in a lot of trouble with Eddie and Alex. Anyway, um,
what
but they
didn't
were
get
going to
him in
put a best
trouble.
of out anyway, and
Yeah.
so the way that Sammy explains it, he wrote 2 new songs, and his ex-wife got all the money for them because they were getting divorced. So he put High Hopes and Buying My Way into Heaven on here, both pretty good songs. Other than that, it's a good mix of the songs from his 4 Geffen albums. It's not complete, but it's pretty good, and it sold all right. Went gold. Um, I think if somebody wanted to start with Sammy, they could do worse than buying this CD.
or Essential Red, probably.
I was going to get to that. That one's a supercharged version of it, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, let's get to that next. 10
But
years after
Essential
that.
Red, but Essential Red, we have issues that where was Satisfied on that album? Where was
Well, that's just exactly. Don't get hooked.
yeah,
Where
where
are
were those
those two
songs?
songs?
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean
I
that was a kind of a big mistake there in my opinion.
well, see that's what I don't understand because an artist as big as Sammy is well known. Usually things get released, get reissued. But those two songs, which for those people that don't know, they were the B-side of the 12-inch heavy metal single that came out in the UK. Satisfied was the B-side of I'll Fall in Love Again. Both recorded for Standing Hampton. They're both really good songs. I'm hoping, this is what I'm hoping happens. Rock Candy, I'm hoping that Rock Candy Records reissues Standing Hampton and puts those two songs on there.
Well, because it got you have Thinking of You and Call My Name on there. So if you're putting unreleased stuff on there, why you'd think that, I mean, that would really supercharge your Sammy fans to get that. But it also has what I like is maybe people who don't follow as hardcore as we do. It had his soundtrack songs on there. You know,
Yes,
you get
that
Winner
was
Takes It
very
All.
handy to have.
Yeah,
Fast Times at Ridgemont High, The Girl Gets
yeah,
Around, Winner Takes
yeah.
It All. You know,
All
one
three of
thing
those.
I wish they'd
And
done
High
though,
Hopes is still on there too.
they stuck High Hopes on here. They didn't put Buying My Way into Heaven, so you got to get Unboxed to get that song.
Right.
But I wish they'd have put the soundtrack version of Heavy Metal on here
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
because it's a little different. But
Hmm.
um, like I said, maybe the Standing Hampton reissue will fix that. But I've been, you know,
If you ever
complaining.
get it.
Yeah, I've been now. Rock Candy did do reissues of. I know they did Street Machine, and when they put Street Machine out, they put "I've Done Everything for You," the studio version, and "Sitting on the Dock of the Bay" on the end of those. So they know what they're doing if they have the rights to use the songs. But this was really handy to get those soundtrack songs because sometimes the soundtrack songs end up costing too much money for the record label to lease from a movie studio. But they did pretty good job at gathering them here. It was nice to have them all in one place. Um, Next thing I want to talk about is a really good live album. Now, again, like you said, with live albums, how live are they? 2003, Live Hallelujah. Um, this was the first time that you got a Sammy live album that combined Van Halen and his solo stuff and Montrose. It's got you've got Gary Sharon coming up and duetting with When It's Love. I think this is the first time Michael Anthony and Sammy started jamming together again because Mike was kind of completely done with Van Halen at this point. Um, yeah, I think this is a really good. I wouldn't start somebody with this, but I think these are good recordings of these songs. What are your thoughts about that album?
Okay, well, my thoughts on that is that those are the shows that I attended. Anything recorded in St. Louis on that, and I know some of that was recorded in Florida too.
Yeah,
I have to go and get my magnifying glass out to look at that. But anything that, like, I know I Can't Drive 55 was in St. Louis. So anything St. Louis in there, I was at. I know the Gary
awesome.
one was Boston.
Yeah,
So there's a couple. I'd have to look at the liner notes, and you probably have you
yeah.
probably can see
I'm trying to, I'm trying to read through it here.
because it says all it if you look on there, it talks about all of the places the different songs were recorded. But when I went to go to St. Louis, I want to say it was around to see that show. St. Louis had a exclusive CD that you had, or a exclusive disc that you had to get that day only, which was this. See that?
Okay, I've seen that on eBay.
Yeah, so I picked this up, and it has a live version of Hallelujah, um, and Hammer Falls Down,
When the Hammer Fall. Wow,
and High and Dry.
that's
So you
cool.
got three tracks. It was almost like these tracks were recorded, could have been left off of the Hallelujah CD.
I
But
got to
that was
get
sweet.
that. That's cool.
We got there as fast as we could to get as many of these as we could in St. Louis that day. But yeah, that is that. So when I put all that stuff together, I definitely put those tracks because when
Oh
have you ever
yeah,
heard Hammer
that's
Falls Down? you
And I
know?
love that song. So it says Shaka Doobie and Rock Candy were in Tampa. When It's
Okay.
Love, Boston. Um, let's see. Right Now in Charlotte. Dreams from Fresno. All other songs, St. Louis.
Okay, yeah. So I was at all of those. That disc that I just showed you has Space Station number 5. It has When the Hammer Falls, and it has The Love, and then it has High and Dry Again and Hallelujah. Um, and it says with video, but I don't remember there being a video on there.
If
But
you yeah, if you put it into a computer, maybe it plays the
maybe.
video.
But that was a nice little collector's item.
Oh
St.
man,
Louis has done
I gotta find one of those.
St. Louis has done so much for me, especially when I was a kid growing up. Because I think my first show was VOA. My first album, I believe, was Steny Hampton. So that was right around the time. It was right after that live Checker Dome in St. Louis concert that MTV had.
Yes.
I
Is that the one
missed
with the
that
car
because,
on stage? Yeah.
dude, I would love to have a live, version of that.
Why? Yeah. Let's have a nice cleaned up version of that. Put it out on CD and Blu-ray.
Yeah. Same thing with HSS. Why hasn't
Yes.
that happened?
Oh, there definitely needs to be a live version
You
because
know
they
what I
did.
really want, and I want even more than that. I want a live version of that farewell with Ronnie Montrose when they had Joe Satriani. I'm like, that was insane, and I bought a DVD version of that. Excited, I was like, yes, I finally got it. They only had 2 songs from that set
I've
on the
seen
DVD
that on
release.
Discogs and be like, I said, well, that's not really what I wanted. I would also like to see them put out when they did the Montrose stuff where Dave Meniketti from Y&T was was in Ronnie's spot because as everybody knows, I'm a huge
They
Y&T
had
fan.
the DVD had compilations of all of those other artists. But then I thought, oh yeah, we're getting to the finale here, and there was 2 songs.
That's weird.
And I'm like, where's the rest of this? This is the band.
Exactly. This is the reason. Yeah, that's kind of weird.
And I know that Sammy had maybe said one time that if Ronnie's wife or family didn't come out with the full show, that he would. So I don't know what happened there. Maybe when they released that DVD, maybe he just thought, okay, that it's on there. But no,
Yeah.
we never got a full live version of that.
There are a ton of archival um, things that are out there that it would be nice to see. There's some really cool black and white footage of Sammy playing Winterland in the
Oh yeah, I've
70s.
watched that. That's
Yeah,
great.
love to see that stuff come out. I mean, that stuff is priceless. He's doing urban guerrilla, like obscure songs, right? Um,
Well, what I was gonna say about St. Louis though is that when I was young and growing up, and we would go see a show, and I started around staying in Hampton, Three Lock Box, and then of course I wanted to go back and get all of his stuff, and that's when I saw a lot of the garage, tapes that you
the
talk
truck
about.
stop tapes, yeah.
Yeah, the truck stop tapes. But when St. Louis KC Radio would always they kind of adopted the whole, they were so hardcore at pushing Sammy's material back in the day. And I think that's one of the reasons why he loved playing there. And they just kind of adopted him because that station was big. So every time we go to a show, they would play Sammy the rest of the night. So you'd hear all of his old classic stuff, Montrose, Plain Jane. It almost felt like a big family reunion. So like every time, whatever song you didn't get during the set, you're gonna hear, tailgating and people partying because you get stuck in that parking lot for like 3 hours, and you're gonna be educated on Sammy's
Yeah,
catalog.
I love that. Yeah,
So that helped a lot.
it's interesting because I know St. Louis was one of the stronger places because in his early solo career, he said that, the East Coast was a tough sell for him. Like he did well in pockets, and I know St.
Mhm.
Louis was one of them. I know he did well in San Antone, and um, next thing I want to talk that it came out in 2014, and it's an album that I actually didn't own until I started working on my book, and I thought, you know what, I should buy this and listen to it because I remember when it first was announced, I wasn't too excited about it. Now it's not a live album, it's not really a compilation, but it's not a studio album either. It's Light Roast with Sammy and Vic Johnson. It's just acoustic.
Oh, what happened? Well, it paused. Yeah. Shit. What do I do when it freezes?
Oh,
Are you back?
sorry. No, I froze there for a second. What's the last thing you heard me say, Wes?
I don't. Oh, you're talking about light roast.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on light roast?
Of course I bought it. I mean, I'm a collector, so
Yeah.
first listen, I thought that I love Give to Live, you know. I know that his go-to, he would rather play Eagles Fly, you know. But there was a while there. I even think on this how well, I even think on Hallelujah, if I'm not mistaken. I always end up making an error on here, but I know he doesn't play it on there. But
He does both.
Give to Live is a I've always loved that track. So I felt like that was missing off this album. Um I'm looking, you know, Dreams, I kind of like that, you know, version. Um but you know what? To be honest, it's kind of something that I listen to, throw it in the collection, but it's not something I pull out a lot. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's funny, like as big a fan as I am, I bought it last year. I did not buy it when it came out. And that's rare for me with Sammy, but I don't because he's just coming off of Sammy Hagar and Friends, which was okay, but then he had Living It Up. It's the whole beach bums, acoustic guitars. Like I want to hear this guy rock, you know? So I really wasn't that excited about an acoustic. I like another version of Halfway to Memphis, which I don't even think is that great a song.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah, I was
with
kind of
you. I'm with you on Give to Live. I think that's a great song, and I know Sammy's more partial to Eagles Fly, but the fact of the matter is, Give to Live was a bigger hit.
yeah. Yeah, it was. But you know, whatever. I got it for a few years, but of the two songs, and even Van Halen did that. Well, he did that song even when he was with Van Halen.
Yeah,
That's was that on Live Right Here Right Now,
I
I
think
believe they
so.
still.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
That's when he did both. He did Give to Live, and I believe he did Eagles Fly. And I even think it was
yeah.
I think
So
I
yeah,
think
I
even
mean,
both of those.
those two songs, and then Only One Way to Rock, they became like honorary Van Halen songs.
Mhm.
Um, I do want to ask you. I had this question, then it disappeared. When you saw Sammy in St. Louis and what became the Live Hallelujah album, was that the Sam and Dave tour?
No, I
Did you
don't think
see any
so.
shows on that tour?
Yeah, I saw one.
How
Of
was
course,
that?
of course, Sammy closed the show because I think when they were on Howard Stern and they flipped a coin or whatever, I
Yeah,
think Dave said he had to have New York, and Sammy was like, "Well, he's going to take," and I knew he was going to take St. Louis. Oh, Sammy killed it. You know, Dave. Let's put it this way: Dave went out there with his, you know, garage. You know, I say garage band because it wasn't Steve Vai or Billy Sheehan. So
no, his Van
if it's
Halen cover
not them,
band.
yeah, it's exactly what it is. And you know, that was already at the point where Dave was losing his, I don't know, you know, his, I don't know, coolness, rock starness, whatever you want to call it. Um, yeah, Sammy. Well, and Sammy's gonna kill that show. You know, there's no way Dave can compare to Sammy and St. Louis. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um, so no, I would say the St. Louis show that was the best one. Looking back on it, because I had a list of all my stuff that I was looking at, was the Montrose reunion, and that was, I believe, 2003. Yeah, 2003, and that was the greatest show because he came out doing his solo material, and then Mikey came back. That's when I remember Mikey came out, which that was a huge surprise at the time because we weren't expecting that.
yeah,
Mikey comes out, they did some Van Hagar tunes, and they closed the night out with Montrose. And it was Ronnie, it was the whole deal, it was the whole band. And that was the only time I'd ever seen Montrose. So
that's
my
so
mind was
cool.
blown. Yeah. And it was so funny because, you know, they always had that thing where Sammy and Ronnie, you know, I guess it was an ego thing, or Sammy's always talking about how, and it was funny because Sammy, you know, always was bantering with the crowd, and he was just like, man, I'm wiped out. And Ronnie took the mic and goes, I'm not. Like, you know, like, you know, he was gonna one up Sammy. I'm ready to go. But I think they played every song off the first album except for just like at the tribute. I don't think they played Make It Last. I think that was the only song they didn't do
That's
that I can
interesting.
remember. Yeah.
Huh.
I think it was I think it was Make It Last that I don't remember. But they did like they almost did like the whole album.
It would have been
Um
really cool if they did Leaving the Warmth of the Womb.
Yeah, no, that wasn't.
But
They just kind of did it like a tribute, to the old. And I'm looking here just for like to remember.
so they didn't
Um,
do I've Got the Fire or Paper Money or
no, it was everything off the first one. One thing on my mind, I think that was the one they didn't do.
oh, okay,
Everything else they did. So I take that back. It might have been, I think that was the one. So they did like maybe seven tracks and we're off,
the majority of the album.
yeah. So they
Yeah.
did like seven tracks. But that was to me, you're that night you got really, when he goes out and does his hits package or whatever that night, you got deep tracks from Sammy. You got Mikey coming out doing the Van Hagar, which everybody went crazy for, and then Montrose. I mean, how can you top that concert?
Well, it's almost three bands
Yeah.
in one. Yeah, like that's
Yeah, you
really
get to see it
awesome.
all.
It's interesting, and this hasn't changed since I wrote the book. I still have yet to see Sammy solo because, like I said, he never plays anywhere close to where I play. Like I'd have to go to Hampton Beach, which is 10 hour. It's crazy. Um, the only time I did see him, and the only time I saw Van Halen, I saw them on the Balance tour. But that
That's the first time I met him was on the Bounce tour.
awesome.
Yeah. That was
Wow.
a pretty big
Wow.
deal for me. Yeah.
So let's talk about this album, The Circle at Your Service.
Hmm?
Um, and the reason Sammy called it At Your Service is because he felt that there was that whole section of Van Halen's career that Van Halen were paying no attention to, um, which for was true for the most part. So you've got a lot of Van Halen, you've got a lot of solo Sammy, you've got some Montrose, and because they had Jason Bonham, um, you got some Led Zeppelin. I think this is a pretty good live album.
I agree. You call it Red Zeppelin. Yeah,
Yeah,
I guess that's what Jason was calling it.
yeah,
I remember when this got together, my first thought was, God, how amazing would it be if we could get Jason and Joe Satriani in the same band? I mean, it's like we had Chickenfoot with Joe, and not taking anything away from Chad. Chad's like amazing. Uh, but I was like, man, if we could just get Joe and Jason in the same line, which we ended up finally getting for a little
yeah,
while.
yeah, for a
Um,
while.
but there's only one way to rock comes out, and that's the first track. Rock and roll, I mean, Van Halen was doing that, so I kind of would wish they would kind of gone a little deeper into the Zeppelin
They
catalog.
didn't go terribly deep with Zeppelin. I mean,
No.
it's a whole lot of
And they
love.
kind of advertised it. Sammy I remember seeing an interview and he was like, we could play 4 nights and never play the same song, which is in just totally right because if you think of Led Zeppelin, he's got all the mantras, Sammy, man. I mean, you could go and I will say I saw him in Oklahoma and they did When the Levee Breaks and that was pretty awesome. I mean, I worked my way up to the front on that one and when they did that, they had like the smoke and Sammy's playing. I mean, come on, my favorite part of all those shows is when Sammy's playing guitar. Um,
Yeah,
but he had his guitar and Vic and him were just, and I love that. But you know what? They never switched that out. They always went to rock and roll and they always went to, When the Levee Breaks. And I kind of wish we at times would have flipped those out a little bit. But,
yeah,
other than that, yeah, I mean, Jason doing that drum solo, I think when we went and saw him, how cool is this? I don't think they ever did it again. On the Jumbotron, they played John playing Moby Dick, on the Jumbotron, and Jason was playing with him, and like, oh, it was so cool. It was like one of the coolest moments. And I was like, oh, why didn't they
yeah,
do that every tour? You
yeah.
know?
Yeah, you'd think that would have been a I would have liked to have heard them do stuff like The Ocean or I don't know, The Rover or
Mhm.
like
But they did a whole lot of love. They did a whole lot of love on that CD as well that you
yeah,
had, which I
they
kind
did
of
Good
forgot
Times,
that.
Bad Times.
But I feel like he already on Not For Sale did a kind of a whole lot of, it wasn't
That
a whole
oh,
lot of
that
love, but
I do not like that medley at all. That was the
yeah,
most pointless.
it seems like a filler. I know.
Yeah. I'm not the biggest fan of that album. I've gone on record.
I'm not either. I
Yeah.
know, yeah, I've
The
had some
Bogus Otis
people fight
guys
me on
gave
that.
me no end of trouble for that. I said,
Well,
guys, I'm a huge fan. It sounds unfinished to me.
Pure Rock Mark got me on that one too. He was like, "Oh, I love that. things have changed, but he didn't even write that song. I think Jesse Harms wrote that
Yeah, I
song.
mean that's he's in the band, but yeah, I don't know. I think so that yeah, actually that's a good segue because I saw this pop up probably on Amazon. Oh, what's that? Got to have that. This is Sammy Hagar. When the party started, they've got a photo of him. It looks to me like from the 1987 album photo shoot, and yet there's everything here is from 1999 onward. So this is a best of, and I use the term loosely. Um, so this has Stand Up and the Real Deal, not the Real Deal. That's on here, but Halfway to Memphis, like it's living on a
Serious
coastline.
Juju.
Hmm?
Serious Juju.
Well, the best thing about this that I can say, like I'm a huge fan of 1013. I think
Hmm.
that's one of his better latter day albums. I remember, obviously when I did the book, I did not go by memory. I had to listen to those albums intently to make sure that was I right about this album? Was and I was really surprised, like, man, I forgot how good this was, how really good this was. So it's got a lot of that on here, but it's got a lot of that stuff that my I just find boring. The living on a coastline, one sip. I'm just not into that stuff. And the new song, Never Said Goodbye, I don't think was anything special either.
No, and then you think Maui Wowie is going to be a song, and it's really not.
No, it's at the
I
end
was
of
thinking I was going to get
1013.
another song, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, it could have been better, but at least, I will say this, at least it's true to its word. It didn't repeat any songs. Also, it's one of those things that say volume one, and that's all there's ever been. Um, and really the only other thing I've got here is this this silly little lockdown they put out, Lockdown 2020, which came out in 2021. I mean, I like the concept behind it. I just wish they'd done the complete songs. Some of these are a minute and a half long.
Well, my highlight on that one would be a whole lot of roasting. I mean,
Yeah,
Sammy kicks the crap out of that one.
yeah.
Sounds good. I mean, that was a nice heavy track on that. What I felt like was missing, they also did a great version of the Robert Palmer song,
Addicted Love,
Doctor.
yeah.
No, they did Doctor Doctor.
Oh, Bad Case of
Yeah,
Loving You. Okay.
yeah, and I
Because
think they
Van
even put it
Halen, they used
out.
to do a little of Addicted to Love before they did
Yeah,
Best of
yeah,
Both Worlds.
yeah. Yeah, they used to play that all the time, but they did that Doctor Doctor, and where was that?
Yeah, that I can hear Sammy sing that too. Like that would have been great.
Oh, it's a great version of it, and I felt like I wish that one would have got on there. But you're right, some of those songs, I think Whole Lotta Rosie's like only 2 minutes long or something
Yeah,
like
they'll
that.
do
It's
like a
like,
verse and a chorus, and that's it.
yeah. So I don't know why we didn't get it. I mean, and I actually, um, was it Funky Funk Shui when I heard it the first time, and then it ended up on,
On
was
Crazy
it?
Times.
Yeah, I don't like the version on Crazy Times as well as I do on the first version of it, which I wondered, that made that CD, didn't it? That's on the
Yeah, it's
disc
the
you
first
have right
song.
now. Yeah, but that version's completely different than the one on
It's
Crazy
quite
Times.
different, yeah.
Yeah, I think I like
Um,
that version better.
there's one major mistake on here. They've got Sympathy for the Human listed as a Van Halen song.
Are you serious?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if it'll show up. Probably won't show up, but track
I'll have to
10.
check that on the way home, but that's
Yeah,
crazy that
Sympathy for the
nobody caught
Human
that.
by Van Halen. I'm like, oh, it's kind of neat they did, Little Richard Keep a Knockin' because
Yeah, I like
that's where
that.
John got the rock and roll intro
Hmm.
fill from. So to hear, yeah, this is where it came from. But, you know, I think, like you said, like there's a deluxe. He's never had a box set, you know. I think there's at least a really good two CD set of unreleased stuff
Oh,
that
easily.
that's it's there. Like it's not like you have to search for it. We know it's there. They just need to put it
Mhm.
together and get, I don't know, Rhino or
And I don't know how many times I've tried, and even with other people, I've, kind of thrown the line out there to try to get any video. VOA was my first show, so that's sentimental to me in a lot of ways. And you can't find. I mean, I think that there was a Westwood One radio. I mean, I taped that Westwood One radio network. He did a live, I think it was Detroit or something like that. And that's the only live anything I have from the VOA show. And you can't find any video, any nothing. And I used to always say, well, it must be because they were ashamed of those jumpsuits or something like that
Outfits.
because they burned everything after that. So I
Yeah.
even got the Otis guys to ask Louser about that, because like, where is it? He's like, oh, I might have something laying. I mean, laying around. We need it.
There's a market for stuff like this. There's fans like us. I mean, yeah, don't reissue a bunch of stuff that we've already got.
Yeah,
Uh,
but is that like you said, other companies after, it's not really.
Well, at this point, so much of like Universal owns, they've got the rights to all the EMI stuff. They've got the rights to the Geffen stuff. They've got the rights to most of it. So it's not like they have to deal with a bunch of different labels. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's classic stuff out there. And do they own live recordings? I don't know. That's a gray area. Just curious, when you saw Sammy in the 80s, do you remember who was opening for him?
Crocus was opening the first show I saw. That was 84.
Okay.
Um, Crocus opened that show, and I pretty much remember, yeah, most of the bands that opened for him. Um, I'm a really big fan of Rival Sons, and that first time I ever saw
Love
Rival
Rival
Sons was
Sons.
was opening for Sammy. Cool thing about that is I remember getting up there and Jay, the singer for Rival Sons, was sitting side stage with Sammy's wife, Kari, and he watched the whole show, and it,
That's
like
one
like
thing I wish that he'd done when he put out Sammy Hagar and Friends, and he does, was
yeah,
it
he wrote one of
not
those
going
songs, didn't he?
down,
Yeah.
that Jay
That's-
wrote? Would have been cool if
Yeah,
he and Jay had traded vocals.
yeah, definitely.
Is that's yeah,
But
and I
that was that there was a lot of bands that he, turned me on to from that. But yeah, I always thought Sammy did a really good job. I think it was his idea to get Alice in Chains to open up back in the
yeah.
day when which, that was a grunge band opening up for them, Van Halen.
And if you look at Van Halen with Dave, they almost kind of went out of their way to get bands that nobody liked. So
Yeah, Cool in the Gang. I remember going to the Van Halen. Well, Cool in the Gang opened up. Cool in the Gang opened up one, and the Bob Marley, or I guess it was Kids, or it was the
Ziggy Marley.
Marleys. Yeah, the Marleys opened up one of those shows too, and
And
those were all Dave.
I know that the promoters at one point they had talked about offering it to Triumph. And I'm like, well, that would
That
have
would
made
have
a
been
lot more
awesome.
sense.
Yeah,
But that's Dave.
yeah.
So there you go. This is great. I mean, I enjoyed, like, I've never seen Sammy in any solo configuration, just the one time with Van Halen. So it's great to talk to somebody that has and seen a bunch of them. So Wes, you have Sammy Hagar fan page over on Instagram. How long have
Mm.
you been doing that? And then just tell the folks about it a little bit.
Really, not even a year, and I did it just thinking, just for myself, kind of, because I was thinking on my regular page, I was posting so much Sammy stuff. I'm like, well, maybe I should just, and I knew people that had fan pages and stuff. So I thought, I'm going to start my own. I've done like a lot of stuff. I've always been wanting to get close to the music. I roadied, I've been a DJ, all that kind of stuff. But I thought, well, maybe I'll just start something and putting stuff on there that I like, just my, things that I'm into, and that'll lighten the load on my regular personal page. And yeah, it's just been fun.
That's why
And
I started the Y&T fan
yeah.
page. I eventually gave that put that over to someone else, but it's like
Mhm.
they at the time the band didn't even have a fan their own page. So I'm like, well, they need
Well,
to
and
have
you
some
know what
presence.
else? There's a billion Van Halen fan pages and
Exactly.
websites. There's a billion. How many just Sammy ones are there? So
Exactly.
there's not a lot of just, but there's of course Van Halen stuff that shows up, but it's only, Sammy related Van Halen. But I did it just on a whim, just like, for fun and stuff like that. But it has opened up an opportunity to meet so many people like yourself and the Bogus guys and Mark, and it's just,
Yep.
Hammy Sagar, there's Billy over there. There's so many people. And when I went to that last show in St. Louis, I hate to say it felt kind of like I don't want to. My sister and everybody that I know will tell you for 10 years or 15 years, every Sammy show I go to, I'm going, this is probably could be the last one. And he's still going strong.
Oh
But that
yeah.
last one in St. Louis just kind of had that feeling of like, is this the final show? I hope to God it's not, but
Yeah.
it
I mean,
did.
at a
But it was
certain point, it has to be,
yeah,
right?
but that's why we want. And I don't know if you listened to the last Otis podcast. All this we're talking about our premiere set list. I mean, Sammy's you know, that's great, dedicated to tributing Van Halen. But before he goes out and before it is a final, I so want to Sammy, let him doing all those old catalog, you know, all of his stuff, you know, because I feel
Yeah.
like that stuff should be tributed just as much as his Van Halen. But I really think Sammy believes that. I know the casuals out there, they want to hear the Van Halen hits, but you know, he was my favorite before Van Halen. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
That's really
Long
cool
before
because
that.
I never heard of him until Van Halen.
Yeah, he was my favorite before that. And like I said, when I got a taste of it on that VOA tour, I mean, I he was a madman. He was hanging from the rafters, he was running around the catwalk. I mean, this guy was playing guitar, singing like amazing. You talk about an amazing front man that he doesn't get the credit for. It was a show like I'd never seen before, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, he doesn't get enough credit. I mean, and people are so ready to jump on it, like, for the fact that he dared
Well, the
replace Dave.
strange thing is that I saw that first show in VOA, and then immediately after that is he got the Van Halen. Well, you know, there was HSS, but immediately after that he got the Van Halen gig. So after that, Van Halen was my favorite band. Nothing against Dave, but that band was just my favorite band, and Sammy was my favorite artist. And when that marriage,
Wow.
you know, we were all bummed that Dave was gone, but that marriage of those two is it was amazing. And I feel like that 5150 tour is still my favorite.
I love the fact that they were so bold and went out there and did mostly new songs. I mean, that like bands don't do that anymore. They put a new album out, you might hear one song and then it gets dropped.
And then you got There's Only One Way to Rock starting the show off. And we still had
Yeah.
a Van Halen
They
to
were
start off.
really planting saying, "Hey, this is who we are now. This is our singer." Yeah,
But
it's
talking
good.
about live stuff, that Live Without a Net is so good. I wish they would have had a audio of that as well, because I remember
See,
back in the day when
I
that came out, I did anything possible to see if we were doing everything to try to get a recording to that, because that version of 5150 in my opinion, is so much better. I love the album version, but I have a problem with Al's electronic. I don't like the drum sound on
It's a
5150s
little
so
dated,
much.
yeah. But yeah, the way
Yeah.
they do that live, that midsection, and Sammy lets a scream out in the middle of that, that's just like unbelievable.
And then they kind of go into that. It's different. They go into like
Yep.
that part
Yeah,
that you know, just kind of they it's completely different in
yeah.
my
I like
opinion.
the way they start off with Best of Both Worlds. Like sometimes it just ain't enough, and then Eddie
Yeah.
will answer. Like that's different.
Yeah.
And I love the
Yeah,
version of that's the
definitely.
first time I heard There's Only One Way to Rock is Live Without a Net. Uh, and I thought every version that I was going to hear had that dual guitar solo, and then I was kind of disappointed when it didn't. Yeah,
Even
I
Sammy
wish that
singing
when they put the box set out of the Sammy years, I was glad they did
yeah.
that. Finally paid some attention, but I wish they'd have stuck the Live Without a Net audio on a CD and just threw that in there
The
too.
weird thing is, there's a bootleg. I found a bootleg of that one time. Finally, was released years later. I don't know where it was, if it was like a shop, and they had Dave on the cover. But it was the recording to Live Without a Net, and it had Wild Thing on it. Had a couple of tracks I felt like that weren't, you know, that was left off. Good Enough, I think, was left off the Live Without a Net DVD, in which they performed also. So there were songs that didn't end up on that DVD.
Yeah,
Um, so that should have been came out on CD, or you know.
yeah. I think I talked about this when I had the guys from Dave and Dave Unchained on. It's not
Hmm.
like you've got to look very hard. This stuff is there. You've just got to collect it. It's
Hmm.
it's it's ready to go.
But just like you were saying about the Sammy reissues, you know, we finally got the Van Hagar, you know, it reissues, which I was, you know, so ecstatic about, because I didn't think those we'd even get those, because when
Well,
Dave was in the band, seemed like it was the Hagar stuff was locked up, but I don't know if we'll get reissues of those Sammy stuff. I don't know if that's on his radar, or even something he's even thinking about.
yeah, I was actually quite surprised that that came out at all because, yeah, for a long time I was thinking, this has got to be the only time in history where there's like four multi-platinum albums that the only versions you're ever going to get are the ones that came out when they first came
Hmm.
out. But,
Yeah.
thankfully that's not the case. So yeah, I mean, we're out there as fans. I mean, that's exactly why I did the book because I didn't see another book. You know, Sammy did his own book. He's got his cookbook, but I didn't see one like this that talked about
No, I
his
love it.
music. So, you know, I perceived the deficit, and that's what any of my books have been like that. So, and it's guys like you that help spread the word, and I really appreciate that. So yes, folks, if you're a Sammy fan, which if you're watching this, I'm sure you are, Sammy Hagar fan page over on Instagram. Follow Wes, give him a like,
It's
and
actually red_rock_fan page 1013. I know that's kind of long. I probably should have shortened it
oh,
up a
okay,
bit.
that's right.
Yeah,
I'm
just
sorry.
just to advertise. No, you're fine.
Yeah, you know what? It's Sammy Hagar fan page is how it comes up under
Yeah,
messages.
that's good enough. Okay. Yeah, you
But
can, as long as you find
yeah,
it.
you'll see his logo. It's a cool logo. It's got the red R, Sammy Hagar,
I'm
Red
working on a
Rocker.
new one, so
Yeah.
in the future. So
So Wes, thanks for coming on doing this. Thanks for talking about these the basically the only albums I haven't talked about yet. And yeah, thanks for doing
what
this.
about the
And
live chicken foot? We didn't even get to that.
well, I wanted to concentrate on Sammy's stuff, but the Chickenfoot
No,
live
I
stuff is
know.
good. I love Chickenfoot. I thought that I liked the first album a lot. I thought the second album was okay, but yeah, and I love that DVD, the Get Your Buzz On. That's some great stuff. And again, like when Van Halen did Live Without a Net, Sammy and Mikey easily could have gone out there and traded on the Van Halen stuff, but no. It was mostly
Mhm.
all new songs. That was pretty gutsy of them.
Yeah, no,
So,
you're right. That was great.
all right. Thanks a lot, Wes.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for watching this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Hope you enjoyed this episode and go put some live Sammy on.